Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Saquon Barkley has galloped his way into the MVP conversation and pushed Philly into the NFC's elite. Also, what is wrong with the Commanders? And speaking of elite teams, the elite teams in college football aren't who you think they are. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
Saquon Barkley set a Philadelphia Eagles rushing record, 255 and 2 touchdowns. He's on pace to be a 2,000-yard rusher this year. And that sound you're hearing is Giants fans smashing their heads into the wall over and over watching this game. A 37-20 win for the Eagles over the Rams. Louis DiBiase from Locked On Eagles joins me now. And Lou, you and Gino Camilleri, your co-host over at Locked On Eagles, have been on this from the start. Saquon Barkley was a perfect fit in Philadelphia, but at this point, he has exceeded all expectations of what he could do in Philly.
Absolutely. I didn't think he was going to come into Philadelphia and do what he's doing right now. This is historic. To go on the run that he's been on and be genuinely in the MVP conversation. Yeah. I don't even think Howie Roseman thought that this would be the ceiling. And Howie Roseman is someone that never signs running backs to contract extensions. He never drafts them in the first and second round. This was a rare decision finally to go after a market inefficiency and pay Saquon a contract that the rest of the NFL didn't want to give him. And it's paying off dividends in the form of a 7-game win streak. And it's not just, Saquon Barkley. It's the offensive line. It's Jeff Stoutland. Sure. It's Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown. And there's a lot of guys to worry about. But Saquon is creating for this offense and turning plays into 70-plus yard touchdown runs. I've never seen anything like it, and I watched LaShawn McCoy for years. So this is genuinely unbelievable.
Yeah, and look, this is a team that it was a little rocky to start the year. Injuries with A.J. Brown. Is it as simple as, hey, they just got healthy, or have they found something else that has made this offense really take off here over the last month and a half?
Yeah, I think part of it's that they're healthy, but the passing offense is still inconsistent. I think they're just finally leaning into the strength of this football team and being who they are instead of maybe who they want to be, which is a pass-heavy offense. But when you have an elite offensive line that's creating, like every other year for any running back, when you have Jeff Stoutland, who's the best run game coordinator in the game, Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley, that's the strength of your football team. And I think they just have to ride that. And finally, after the bye week, they've committed to that approach when 3 linemen approached Nick Sirianni in his office at the bye. And since then, that's why they're winning 7 games in a row. So I think it's just that they're leaning into the true identity of this football team. And that's what Jalen and Nick Sirianni wanted after the bye week, was to find out who they are, what their identity is. And I think it's that they're a running offense.
Yeah, and just to put a point on it, the top 3 rushers in the NFL right now, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, and Josh Jacobs, all of them, 2024 free agent running back class, all of them. Well, certainly Barkley and Jacobs got nice deals. Derrick Henry, we didn't know what that was going to be. That has worked out beyond anyone's expectations in Baltimore as well. The question is going to be, at this point, is Philadelphia, have they crept into that tier with Detroit, or do you think they are still a tier below? And maybe a more important question is, can they get there by the end of the season when this really matters, January football?
I think they're there. I really do. And it's not just because of Saquon Barkley and the way they're running the football, but it's also because of the way this defense is playing. Like, that defensive line took over against Sean McVay's offense, that the first few drives.
Brandon Graham turning back the clock.
36. He looked like he was 26 tonight. So I think it's just that the defense doesn't have a single weakness on the football team. They're so well coached. And yeah, again, Jalen Hurts, is he who he was in 2022? No. But I don't think that's really needed to get through the NFC right now. I still think he can make a few extra plays compared to Jared Goff and the other NFC quarterbacks when push comes to shove. He's still playing good enough where you can win with him. And so, yeah, I think they are in that tier because this is one of the most complete rosters that Howie Roseman has put together.
Okay, all of that being true, we are not that far removed from me talking to you and Gino about Nick Sirianni. And in a big moment, he's going to do something that's going to make you go, what is happening here? So is it just that, look, Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio have done a good enough job and Howie Roseman did a good enough job putting this team together that they can win in spite of some of that stuff? Or is there still that Philly sports fan brain in the back there going, I don't know, in January, he still might do that thing that's going to make us all go, what are you doing?
Yeah, it's still the elephant in the room for me, at least. I don't know. I think Eagles fans right now are riding the wave of a 7-game win streak and are back on the Sirianni bandwagon. And I do have to give Nick credit. Like, I think he's very open-minded to change. Most players don't feel comfortable walking into their coach's office and saying, we need to change everything about this offense. So I think the players are still fighting for him. He's never lost the locker room. But yeah, for me, I still don't really trust his in-game decision-making. And that's definitely in the back of my head, like when it comes time for the NFC title and there's a 4th down decision against Dan Campbell's Lions, is going to be the right call. That's the one thing I'm still a little worried about. But everything else is working so well that they might be able to win and kind of just keep Sirianni out of the way.
You can stay up to date on the Philadelphia Eagles by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Eagles on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, what's wrong with the Commanders? Before we get to that, the Denver Broncos took care of business. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And that winning $5 bet could be on Monday Night Football. The Chargers host the Ravens for their second straight primetime game. FanDuel loves the Ravens in this game, has them 2.5-point road favorites. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. The Denver Broncos took care of business against the Las Vegas Raiders.
The Denver Broncos improved to 7-5 after Sunday's victory against the Las Vegas Raiders, 29-19. This is Cody Rourke, host of Locked On Broncos, and Denver holds on late to outlast the Las Vegas Raiders, who made it a little interesting there in that final 4 minutes. Nick Bonito coming up big, but more importantly, Bo Nix's hot play. The trend continues. Court was in session with his 2 touchdown connections to Cortland Sutton on the outside, who came up big for the Broncos, not only in the red zone, but also on several big third down situations. The Broncos unfortunately lose Riley Moss in this game. We'll await further word on his injury status from head coach Sean Payton, but a lot to break down for the Broncos' big victory on Sunday. They have swept the Las Vegas Raiders for the first time since the days of Peyton Manning. Make sure you check out Locked On Broncos for the post-game report.
The Vikings outlasted a ridiculous end-of-game rally from the Chicago Bears for an overtime win on the road.
Okay, I'm a little shaky after that one. After a game that felt like it was going to be a little bit no drama, Vikings led, 27-16? The Bears get a touchdown, 2-point onside kick, bring it back, force overtime, but a 3-and-out and a long drive the other way. The Vikings clear it out and actually take a win to go to 9-2. This was a wild one at the end, probably way more wild than it had any right to be. We're about to go on to the Minnesota football party and talk about it, but first, real quick, Sam Darnold on a bad foot, had to come out of the game for 2 plays, and then engineered just absolutely efficient, cold, mechanical football for the last 2 drives to kick 2 field goals that ended up being the difference here. The Vikings defense absolutely nails until 2 minutes. Most of the problems they had were in 2 minutes, but they ended up sealing this one on a Jonathan Grenard sack, mostly in overtime. That comes on a drop 8 coverage. All kinds of great stuff to talk about. We'll see you on the postcast and on Locked On Vikings.
And Will Levis, he got sacked 8 times, and the Titans still beat the Texans.
Boom! A massive upset for the Tennessee Titans over the fraudulent Houston Texans. And I gotta tell you, your boy called this one, baby. I told you guys that the upset was coming, and here we are. The Tennessee Titans beat the Texans 32-27, and Will Levis led the charge. I think the most impressive thing to me in this game was the Titans' ability to bounce back from adversity. Will Levis throws the pick 6. Tony Pollard fumbles. The obvious and constant. Special teams issues, the fumble by Jaquan Jackson on the punt, like so many things went wrong for the Titans, and they continued to bounce back. And then the defense, clutch at the end to close it out. What an incredible win for Brian Callahan and his process. A lot to clean up, but this Tennessee Titans football team is going to be a problem in the back half of the season.
The Washington Commanders were gigantic favorites to beat the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday. That did not matter as they lost to the shorthanded Cowboys and now have lost 3 straight. Locked On Commanders host David Harrison tries to make sense of it all.
We didn't have any scoring initially in this game. A couple of possessions went by without any scoring. The Dallas Cowboys defense actually was able to drive down the field to open the game. Not a very confident opening for the Washington Commanders defense, but ultimately they come up with a block punt. Quan Martin gets his hand on the punt. Mike Davis gets the return, gets it into plus territory. So if you don't know what plus territory means into opposing territory. So anything Cowboys 49 and forward would be plus territory. Washington Commanders get to start that drive in that plus territory. They end up with a 41-yard field goal from Austin Seibert to open up the scoring. Unfortunately, they also lose Brian Robinson Jr. to an ankle injury. Now, Brian Robinson was able to come back in the game, but ultimately, especially in the second half, ended up sitting out the rest of the game. Did not have to talk after the game, which is common protocol for injured players, and opted not to as well. Had the option to, but he chose not to. Brian Robinson, a pretty not soft-spoken, but pretty quiet guy if he's given the opportunity to be, and that's what he did. That was the score. 9:01 in the first quarter. Washington Commanders get a field goal, and from there was no scoring. There was a lot of action. There were some injuries, unfortunately. There were some turnovers. There was some sacks going on, but no points. No points going up on the board. And in the first half alone, the Washington Commanders start 3 drives in Dallas territory. Again, that first drive of the game, Dallas 40, produces that first field goal of the game. Then they start at the Dallas 47 for their 3rd drive of the game. They start at the Dallas 39 for their 5th drive of the game. Those 3 possessions that begin, again, in plus territory, net 1 field goal, 1 punt, 1 interception. That is not the way that you take advantage of playing in plus territory, and that is the biggest takeaway of this game right now for me, which is this offense has lost all of its teeth. And really, if you want to go back to it and you want to kind of use hindsight for the 2020 vision that it affords us to have, you really go back to Week 8 against the Chicago Bears, and that is following the Week 7 win over the Carolina Panthers, where Washington Commanders quarterback Jaden Daniels gets injured. He hurts his rib, leaves that game after that first possession, doesn't come back in, is able to play against the Chicago Bears. And that's really the first game, if you go back and remember, that we see the offense kind of sputter a little bit. Candy Waller of Bowie TV and I were talking about this in the press box ahead of and during tonight's game as well. And, at the time, you have that game against the Chicago Bears. The team's able to win thanks to the Hail Mary. You go into Week 9, you go into Week 10, you go into Week 11, and then obviously we get here to Week 12. And essentially, everybody's trying to give the team the benefit of the doubt. And you're saying, well, there's the rib injury. He's still probably getting over, trying to be a warrior, trying to gut it through. And I know I had some insiders say, hey, look, if the rib is hurting him that bad, they need to put Marcus Mariota in there. And I'll tell you right now, I completely understand the concept of if your starter is not able to play enough, well enough or physically enough to really get you that winning effort, then you need to turn to the veteran backup who maybe has more experience and kind of weather the storm a little bit. Totally get it. It's just not how teams, unfortunately or fortunately, tend to operate. Then you have the game against Pittsburgh Steelers, for example, where I would kind of go in there and say, that's not necessarily a terrible Jaden Daniels game. I know he missed the Luke McCaffrey throw and all that stuff, certainly had some misses of his own. But really outside the drops, I think the drops, if those things get cleaned up, the Washington Commanders have a much better opportunity to win that game. And then, of course, the one defensive gaffe towards the end of that game. But really, when you have the benefit of hindsight, and we kind of look back at this, and again, Sam Fortier of the Washington Post, we've all been talking about it, but Sam, just straight up asked Cliff Kingsbury this last week, straight up, hey, there seems to be a history of your offenses kind of fading in the back half of seasons. Kind of what are your thoughts on that? And Cliff kind of gave the old, I'm not really sure what you're talking about, what you're referring to. I'd have to see it and all those things. And it is what it is. Didn't really want to answer the question, but this is just another one of those examples and one of the things that's going to be talked about here. And
stay up to date on the Washington Commanders all year long by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Commanders on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, the elite college football teams are not who you think they are. Want a tip on getting the best deal for tickets? Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. The Big 12 is in chaos because of myriad upsets. Many are calling the conference weak. But the SEC has experienced a similar season, and most still see them as the cream of the crop. Interesting. As Locked On Big 12 host Drake Toll discusses, don't make the mistake of assuming the SEC or the Big 10 is miles better than the Big 12.
That same Indiana team with games against Maryland, Northwestern, Nebraska. I know Colorado not lost to Nebraska, but that was week 2, man. We already talked about this. Those games don't count. I beg some of these Big 10 teams to play the depth of a schedule that a Big 12 team is going to get. I beg some of these SEC teams like Texas to do it. Texas schedule, Colorado State, Michigan, UTSA, UL Monroe, Mississippi State. Name me one good team so far. Then they beat Oklahoma, who say, yes, they won against Alabama. They're still not a very good football team. Vanderbilt, Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky. What? I mean, you put BYU in that schedule. You put Iowa State in that schedule. They're going to the SEC championship. Listen to the teams that I just read you. It's stunning how the only team on the Texas schedule that I'm like, yeah, we probably lose to Georgia. But just in the same way that we would lose to Georgia, Georgia would lose to Ole Miss, who lost to Kentucky, And again, transitive property doesn't work all that much. But I think we have to understand these college football playoff juggernauts are not who you think they are. That's my case that I play with the committee, is to actually watch the football and consider the depth of a conference, because the Big 12 is deep. It's not just this rollover league.
How about this? We need to recalibrate everything we think about college football, maybe every season now, because of the way the transfer portal works, because recruiting has changed, because the game has changed. Yes, a 3-loss Alabama team has a chance to get into the playoff, but because of the expanded playoff, isn't that exactly what we've been asking for? And isn't a 12, 13 game season, all these conference championship games, isn't that what we're supposed to be playing for, to find the best teams, not the most aesthetically pleasing teams? That's the whole deal. So yes, it might be a little harder to decide if the Big 10 is better than the Big 12, is better than the SEC, is better than whoever. But that's why we have the playoff. It's why we have an expanded playoff in addition to being a money grab. So we know for sure, because the games were decided on the field. In college football, more than any other sport, we are obsessed with the rankings. They don't matter anywhere else. Because once the tournament starts in March Madness, we know that anything can happen. In the NFL, the seedings don't matter immediately. And yeah, in the NBA, best of 7, we expect the better, higher seeded teams to win, but they don't always. So now college football is just going to look more like everywhere else, which is good because it means we get to have exactly these types of arguments. And finally, rookies don't typically speak out against their team, but Malik Neighbors isn't most rookies, and the Giants are the Giants. After a 30-7 loss at home to the Buccaneers, Neighbors gave his assessment of the team. Soft as a word I can't say. Of course, most players agreed with his assessment. One player said they didn't believe every player gave 100%. Another player simply said, that's ass, when asked about the Giants trailing 30-0 at home following their bye week. One thing is for certain, things aren't good for the G-Men. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're a new subscriber to Locked On Sports Today, we're here for you with the biggest stories in sports every day. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, can the Ravens inch closer to the Steelers with a win on Monday night? So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.